Somewhere around 3 in the morning, in a freezing airport terminal full of stranded, furious, exhausted travelers, a man in a gray hoodie sat quietly in the corner and watched the overnight manager give away her own dinner to a child who wasn't even her responsibility. And in that moment, without saying a single word, he made a decision. She had no idea he was there. She had no idea who he was, and she certainly had no idea that by the time she clocked out at dawn, bone-tired, having held an entire terminal together with nothing but patience and willpower for 11 straight hours, that quiet man would already have decided to change the entire direction of her life. Stay with me all the way to the end of this one, because what that decision was, and the moment he finally told her about it as the sun came up, is something I think you're going to carry with you for a long, long time. It was the kind of night that airports have nightmares about. A massive storm had rolled in and shut the whole region down. Flight after flight canceled, hundreds of travelers stranded with nowhere to go and no way out until morning at the earliest. The big airlines had mostly packed up their desks and gone home, leaving recorded apologies and dark counters. And in one tired regional terminal, with the heat barely working and the vending machines half empty, the entire burden of several hundred stranded, frightened, angry human beings came to rest on the shoulders of one overnight operations manager. Her name was Carmen Ortiz, and she was 46 years old, and she had been doing this job for 21 years. If you've never worked a night like that, it's hard to explain what it asks of a person. Carmen was the one the furious businessman screamed at because his meeting was ruined. She was the one the terrified elderly woman clung to because she'd never spent a night away from home and didn't understand what was happening. She was the one who had to find blankets for 100 people when there were only 30, who had to tell a young couple their honeymoon flight was gone, who had to calm her own exhausted 20-year-old gate agent down in the back room when the kid finally cracked and started crying from the stress. Every single emergency in that terminal, all night long, rolled downhill until it landed on Carmen. And Carmen caught every one of them. That was the thing the man in the corner noticed first. She caught every one. He'd come in around 8 that evening, a man in a plain gray hoodie, a ball cap, glasses, the kind of man your eyes slide right off of. His own flight had been canceled like everyone else's, and unlike most of the people raging at the desk, he'd simply found a seat in the corner, pulled his cap low, and settled in for a long night. He had a way of going unnoticed. He'd spent years learning it. Because the man in the gray hoodie was Daniel Pierce. And if Carmen Ortiz had ever in her exhausting life had time to sit down and watch a movie, she'd have known that face instantly. One of the most recognizable actors alive, a man who could not normally walk through an airport without security and a crowd. But that night he was just another stranded traveler in the corner, invisible, watching. And Daniel Pierce had nothing to do for the next 11 hours but watch. So he watched Carmen Ortiz work. He watched the businessman lean over the counter and unload on her. Really unload. The cruel personal kind. The kind that says this is your fault and you're incompetent and I want your name. And he watched Carmen take it without flinching, wait for the man to run out of steam, and then say, quietly, and without a drop of sarcasm, "Sir, you're right that this is awful, and I'm sorry. The weather's not something I can fix. But I can get you on the very first flight out in the morning, and I can find you a blanket, and there's hot coffee I'm making in the back myself because the machine's out. Let me take care of you." And he watched the businessman who had come in swinging deflate into something almost human and mumble a thank you, because it is very hard to keep yelling at someone who refuses to yell back and just keeps trying to help you. He watched her kneel down, actually get down on the freezing floor, to talk to the terrified elderly woman at eye level, holding both her hands, telling her she was safe, that Carmen herself wasn't going anywhere all night, that she'd personally make sure the woman got on her flight and got home to her daughter. He watched her stay there a full 5 minutes she didn't have, because the woman needed 5 minutes more than the line needed her. He watched her disappear into the back and come out 20 minutes later, and he was close enough to catch a glimpse through the door. Close enough to see her standing in that back room with her arm around her young gate agent, the 20-year-old kid who'd hit his breaking point, telling him gently that he was doing great, that everybody breaks on a night like this, that she'd broken too her first big storm, that he should splash some water on his face and take 10 minutes and she'd cover the desk. He watched her take the kid's shift on top of her own without a word of complaint. And then, around 3 a.m, came the thing that made the decision. There was a young mother stranded with a small child, a little boy, maybe 4, who'd long since run through whatever snacks they'd packed, and who was now doing that exhausted, hungry, end-of-his-rope crying that small children do, the kind that breaks every adult heart within earshot. The vending machines were empty. The food court had closed hours ago. There was nothing. The mother was near tears herself, rocking the boy, apologizing to everyone around her, with nothing left to give him. And Daniel Pierce watched Carmen Ortiz walk over to her own bag behind the counter, take out the dinner she'd brought from home, clearly the only food she had for an 11-hour overnight shift, and bring it to that little boy. A homemade sandwich, some crackers, a little container of cut fruit. She crouched down and made a whole game of it, told the boy it was a special midnight airport picnic that only the bravest travelers got to have, and got him giggling, and got him eating, while his mother put a hand over her mouth and tried not to fall apart. Carmen gave away her only meal of the night to a hungry kid who wasn't her problem. And then she went back to the desk and worked the next 6 hours on an empty stomach. And she never mentioned it to a soul. And she clearly never once thought of it as anything but the obvious thing to do. And in the corner, the quiet man in the gray hoodie sat very still and made his decision. Here's the thing you have to understand about Daniel Pierce, the thing almost nobody knew. For all the films, the thing he actually cared most about in his life was a foundation he'd built and quietly funded for years. One that did a very specific thing. It found people. Not famous people, not connected people, not people who knew how to ask. It found the invisible ones, the ones who'd spent their whole lives taking care of everyone else, and had quietly given up on anything for themselves. And it gave them the one thing they'd stopped letting themselves want, a real shot at their own dream. He'd grown up watching his own mother do exactly that, pour herself out for everyone around her, year after year, and bury her own dreams so deep she eventually forgot they were there. He'd built the whole foundation as a kind of letter to her, too late. So when Daniel Pierce traveled, he watched. Not for talent, exactly, for something rarer, for the person holding everything together while the world screamed at them. The one being quietly, relentlessly good when they had every reason and every excuse to stop. He'd been doing it for years, and in 21 years' worth of an 11-hour night, Carmen Ortiz had shown him more of it than almost anyone he'd ever watched. But he didn't move. Not yet. Because he'd learned that the decision was only half of it. The other half was finding out what the dream was, the one she'd buried. And so, in the slow gray hour before dawn, when the terminal had finally quieted into a field of sleeping bodies and Carmen was leaning on the counter for the first time all night, Daniel Pierce got up, walked over, and bought a cup of the coffee she'd made herself in the back. And he started gently to talk to her. Just a stranded traveler, killing the last hour before dawn. He asked her how long she'd been doing this. "21 years," she said, with a tired laugh. He asked if she'd always wanted to work at an airport. And Carmen looked at him for a second, and maybe it was the exhaustion, or the 3 a.m. honesty that comes when the whole world is asleep, but she told him the truth. "No," she said, smiling at how strange it was to say it out loud. "No. When I was young, I wanted to open a little place. A bakery, if you can believe it. I'm a good baker, really good. My grandmother taught me. She wrapped her hands around her own coffee. I had it all planned out when I was 20. And then my mom got sick, and I needed steady money and benefits, and I took this job because it was supposed to be temporary. And then there was always another reason. My sister's kids. The mortgage. Somebody always needed me to be the steady one." She shrugged, and there was no bitterness in it, just a kind of soft, settled grief. 21 years of taking care of everybody's emergencies. The bakery's just a thing I think about sometimes at 3 in the morning. It's fine. It's a good life. I take care of people. That's worth something. It's worth more than something, Daniel said quietly. And then he asked her one more question. If money weren't the reason, if it really weren't, would you still want it? The bakery? Carmen was quiet for a long moment. And then, very softly, like she was admitting something shameful, she said, "Every single day." Dawn came up gray and cold over the terminal. The storm had passed. The first flights started boarding. Carmen got every single one of her stranded travelers onto a plane. The businessman, the elderly woman, the young mother and the little boy who'd had the midnight picnic. She did it on no food and no sleep in 21 years of practice. And then, finally, a little after 7 in the morning, the relief manager arrived, and Carmen Ortiz's shift was over. She was gathering her things, putting on her coat, when the man in the gray hoodie stepped up to her one more time. And this time he took off the cap and the glasses, and Carmen Ortiz found herself looking at a face she vaguely felt she should know, though she was far too tired to place it. "I owe you the truth about who I am," he said. "But first I want to tell you about a decision I made around 3 o'clock this morning." And he told her. "The thing I told you about at the very beginning. The thing I haven't been able to shake. I've been sitting in that corner for 11 hours, Daniel said. I watched the whole night. I watched you get screamed at and answer with kindness. I watched you get down on the floor for a frightened old woman. I watched you take a crying kid off your gate agent's hands and cover his shift. And around 3 in the morning, I watched you give a hungry little boy the only food you had for an 11-hour night, and then work until dawn on an empty stomach and never tell a soul." He paused, and his voice was thick. "And somewhere in there, I made up my mind about something, before I ever knew your name or your story. I decided that I had just watched the most capable, most generous person I've come across in years spend her entire life taking care of everyone else's emergencies, and I decided it was somebody's turn to take care of one of hers." He told her who he was then, and he told her about the foundation, and he told her that it existed for exactly one purpose: to find the invisible people who'd buried their own dreams under everyone else's needs, and to hand those dreams back to them, not as charity, but as an investment in a person who'd already proven, over 21 years, exactly who she was. "I'm not offering you a handout," he said. "I watched you turn down softer things than that all night. I'm offering you a partner. The foundation will fund your bakery, the lease, the build-out, the ovens, the first year while you find your feet. You'll own it. You'll run it. It's yours. We don't take a cent back. The only thing we ask, the only thing, is that somewhere down the line, when you've got more than you need, You find some other invisible person holding everyone else together, and you do for them what somebody finally did for you. He smiled. I think they call it a midnight picnic. Carmen Ortiz, who had not cried once through an entire 11-hour night of other people's disasters, stood in the gray dawn light of the terminal and finally cried. For herself this time. For the 20-year-old with the bakery dream. For the little girl her grandmother taught to bake. For every 3 in the morning version of herself who'd quietly let it go. She runs that bakery now. I'll let you imagine the rest. But I think you already know it's the warmest place on its street. And I think you already know there's a standing rule there, posted where the staff can see it, about anyone who comes in hungry and can't pay. The kitchen makes mistakes on purpose. She learned that somewhere, on a long cold night, from the best of who she already was. I think about this story more than I expected to. And not because a movie star paid for a bakery. The money's just the ending. The thing that stays with me is the 11 hours before the money, the part where nobody important was watching. Or so she thought. Because here's what gets me. Carmen Ortiz was extraordinary on that night for one reason. She had no idea anyone who mattered was paying attention. She wasn't performing. There was no camera, no boss, no reward on the horizon. There was just a freezing terminal full of difficult, frightened people, and a tired woman who decided, 21 years ago and every single night since, to be good to them anyway. The man in the corner didn't create her character. He just happened to witness it. The goodness was already there, running all night long in the dark, for an audience of no one. And that's the quiet truth underneath the whole thing. The decision Daniel Pierce made at 3 in the morning, he could only make it because of who Carmen already was when she thought no one was looking. He didn't reward her for a performance. He recognized something real. And the lesson isn't be good so that someday a famous stranger rewards you. That almost never happens, and it's the wrong reason anyway. The lesson is that who you are at 3 in the morning, when you're certain nobody important is watching, is the truest thing about you. It's the only thing that was ever really yours. Carmen's whole life was built out of those unwatched hours. And it turned out they were the most valuable thing in that entire airport. So here's what I'll leave you with. You are going to have your own 3 in the morning moments this week. Not in an airport, in the small, unwitnessed corners of your ordinary life. The moment when you could be kind, and no one would know if you weren't. The moment when you could give away the last of something to someone who can't pay you back. The moment when you could take care of one more person when you're already running on empty. Nobody important will be watching. That's exactly when it counts. That's who you actually are. If this story moved you, leave one word in the comments, Dawn, for the morning Carmen's whole life finally turned. Just so I know you made it to the end. And so I know there are still people out there being good in the unwatched hours. And if you believe the most extraordinary people are the ones holding the world together while everyone's asleep, then subscribe, because those are the only people we make stories about on this channel. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.